And welcome back, everyone, to the Excellent Decisions podcast. This is Robert McPhee, your host, and my guest and I are here to help you make more excellent decisions driven by your vision, your values, and your value, rather than all the stress and pressure that we're faced with in the world. And at the current time, as we're recording this, the stress and pressure in the world has been ramped up pretty seriously. So we're doing something right now called the Wisdom Series, where I'm doing an episode every day, tapping into some of the teachers and mentors that I've had over the years that I've noticed are really helping me. My connection to them and what I've learned from them is really helping me deal with the current situation and circumstances and climate that we're faced with. And the idea is to tap into some of that wisdom and share it with you all as well. So today I'm joined by Blaine Bartlett, who is someone who I've known, wow, I should have calculated how many years, but probably originally through Transformational Leadership Council.
Yeah, TLC.
And through my work with Jack Canfield. And again, absolutely falls into the category of a mentor and teacher to me. I'll show you, I'll put this up if you're watching the video. If you're just listening to the audio, you won't be able to hear this, but I'm holding up Blaine's bio, which has some highlights, because if I just read Blaine's bio from start to finish, it would take most of the half hour that we've allocated for this. So I'm going to give you just a couple of highlights to give you an indication if you haven't heard of Blaine before. He's an executive coach, a management consultant, and organizational and leadership development expert. He's the president and CEO of Avatar Resources, Inc., a consulting firm that he founded in 1987. And part of why I really wanted to get into this conversation today, his firm has affiliate offices in 4 different countries. So he's very familiar with the international side of what's going on right now. He's also an adjunct professor at China's Beijing University. There's another connection for us to touch on. And on the teaching faculty of the American Association for Physician Leadership, Doctors, Healthcare. Any connection there that we might be able to touch on? Maybe. He's considered a major innovative voice in the areas of leadership development, executive coaching, organizational development, and change management. Certified as an executive, organizational, and master somatic coach, and was instrumental in the founding of the coaching industry in Japan and China. There we are again. He's the author of 4 different books, and during the past 3 decades has consulted worldwide with executives, companies, and governments, delivered keynotes and training programs to approximately 300,000 individuals. That number's probably gone up since that bio was written.
Yep.
But the bottom line is Blaine has a tremendous amount of experience, a tremendous amount of knowledge, a tremendous amount of wisdom. So I was thrilled that he was willing to join us and share his expertise. So thank you, Blaine. Welcome. I'm thrilled you're here. And amidst all this chaos, how the heck are you doing?
No, Robert, it's great to be here. And thank you for the invitation to join. I think it's a very timely conversation. And, just in answer to that question, we're doing fine. We are, what's the word? Sheltered in place, I guess.
Right.
And socially distancing. We're up here on my home on Whidbey Island near Seattle, and there are actually more deer on this island, I think, than there are people. So we're fairly well protected in that regard.
Yeah. I keep telling people living in Sonoma and working from home is not that much different from sheltering in place every single day anyway. I mean, it's definitely ramped up, but it feels pretty secure to kind of be a little distanced as you are out on the island. With all the experience that you do have, and having seen a lot in the world, what is your perception? Like, what are you seeing out there? Kind of starting with like the 30,000 foot view. What's your perception and your view on what's going on out there right now?
If you read the news and are paying attention to it, it's obvious that there is something afoot. I don't mean to minimize that by being cliche here, but I came across something, and this might put things in perspective just a bit. In the year 138, I think it was, Marcus Aurelius had just come into position as the emperor of Rome. And for those of you that may not know who Marcus Aurelius was, outside of his historical role as an emperor in Rome, he was also one of the fundamental fountainheads, I guess you can call it, of Stoic philosophy. And I mentioned this, and I mentioned specifically this date, because on that year, in that year, a virus started emerging out of China. Sound familiar? And it literally spread across the known world, east, west, north, south. It was essentially a pandemic, and it ended up killing approximately 18 million people. Now, in that time frame, 100, the year 138, I believe it was, 18 million people was a significant chunk of the population. Now, what was interesting about this in a number of ways is that that plague lasted for approximately 15 years. And in that time, Marcus Aurelius did some amazing things. And this is one of the things that he wrote about. We have little to no, actually, he said, we have no control over external circumstances. Stuff happens. What we do have control over are our thoughts, our beliefs, our attitudes, and our behaviors. Those are really the only things that we have absolute control over. And in the context of current times, it's important to realize we got through that back then. And we will get through this now. Now, that doesn't minimize in any way, what's going on in terms of disruption. But to the point specifically about, what do I think is going on out here? I think people are being, and this is part of the human condition. We pay attention to external results and our feelings about external results as a barometer, or as a gauge to what our current and future reality could be. And that is really backwards. It isn't to say don't pay attention to them or don't notice them. But my future isn't predicated on my past. It really isn't. My future isn't even predicated on my present necessarily. I have complete agency in terms of my thoughts, my feelings, my attitudes, and my behaviors. And the work I do, and we'll talk about this, is in the domain of leadership. And leadership is the art as well as the science of moving possibility into reality. Mm-hmm. And I don't want that reality, that possible reality, to be a faint glimmer of this past reality that I'm dealing with, or this current reality even that I'm dealing with. So that's more of a philosophical approach to answering the question. Stuff is happening, and it's disruptive. Economies are going sideways, and that happened in 135 AD. Mm-hmm. Economies went sideways. Politicians didn't know what the hell to do. Doctors were flummoxed. Hospital care or healthcare was overloaded.
Yeah,
all of that happened.
Yeah, it's a good reminder too. When and I hadn't heard that before, so thank you for sharing that. And I think it's such a valuable perspective because, first of all, it reminds us, as crazy as things are, we really are in an amazing time in history to be able to handle something like this, to know what's, to be in the US and to know what's happening in China and to get the information. And as frustrated as we might be or might not be about the way it's been handled or how quickly or how well or whatever, the truth is, relative to, not that long ago, or in a case of, 138 AD, a pretty darn long time ago, depending on how you look at time, mm-hmm. That there's not going to be the kind of catastrophic loss that there was at that time, that we are better equipped to handle it. And yet that the same core issues of here's this incredible event that's happening, and what can we control and what can we do is the same core conversation. Yeah. And it's interesting because I was thinking, okay, this is going to be like the business and leadership conversation. But it really does come back to the personal and professional development principles of how are we going to respond? Like what?
Well, every cloud has a silver lining, I guess, to be cliche here once again. But there's the law of polarity comes into play with this, and when I say the law of polarity, every up has a down, every inside has an outside, every hot has a cold, every good news has bad news associated with it. Life and death are a continuum. They just exist as part of this thing we call life, birth and death specifically. From a business perspective, the idea of polarity comes into play here in the context that everything is connected. And one of the silver linings I see in this for the business environment is, if we're smart, we start paying attention to that connection. We start predicating our business activities on that connection. And you mentioned that I do work with physicians. The Hippocratic Oath, first, do no harm. When businesses approach what they're doing from the perspective of first, do no harm, that changes the business dynamic in terms of how we go to market, how we source our goods, how we work with our vendors, how we actually take care of our employee base. All of that stuff comes into play. Nothing is disposable. Everything is connected. I need to be a husband of that.
Mhm.
That notion, as well as that ideal, going forward. And like I said, if we're smart, we will start to rebuild around that sort of an ideal. And that's the whole thesis of compassionate capitalism, as well as conscious capitalism. Conscious capitalism speaks to one thing, which is awareness of that connection. Compassionate capitalism is the behavioral dynamic of conscious capitalism. Do
Yeah.
we behave compassionately? Do we behave as if we're connected? So there's going to be opportunity here. This is interesting. In the 1930s, in the Great Depression, there were more millionaires created in the United States per capita than in any other time in our history, including our recent history with the unicorns and the billionaires appearing. More millionaires created in the Great Depression on a per capita basis than in any other time in our history. Every calamity has an opportunity on the other end of it. So yes, stuff is happening. Yes, it's perturbing. And I say perturbing in the sense that it's upsetting the apple cart.
Mhm.
But if we're paying attention, there are opportunities to be gleaned. There are things that we can do, both collectively as well as individually and as businesses.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's interesting, you were referencing, you wrote the Compassionate Capitalism book, and you and I were recently engaged in a really cool conversation because I've been actively involved in the conscious capitalism community here in the Bay Area and the differences between the two. And I agree with you that there are some real opportunities for businesses and for all sorts of organizations to look at the way we operate
Yeah.
and see, what can we do better? How can we do things differently, given the circumstances, and as a result of what's going to be changing and what's going to be different coming out of all this.
Mm-hmm.
So you were talking also about leadership, and I know you've had the chance to work with a lot of leaders over the years, and I'd like to first of all put a little context around it, because I think with someone like you, it's really easy to look at really high-level leaders. I know you've worked with leaders at the highest levels of organizations, but in the context of everything that's going on, before we kind of look at how the current circumstances are impacting leaders and what leaders can do differently, like how are you looking at leadership right now? Like who fits into that conversation as a leader in your mind right now?
Right now, very few people, and it's predicated on how I define leadership. Most people have an idea in mind that leadership is a directive activity. Leaders, give the marching orders and away we go. That isn't leadership. Leadership is the activity of co-creating coordinated movement in a system that produces the actions that we need to get the results that we want. So there's two pieces to this: co-creation and coordinated movement. So if I just take it from a political perspective and look on the political side of things, do we have leaders out there? We have very few that are stepping into that definition: co-creation and coordinated movement, particularly at the national level. When we start moving down into state governorships, we've got some governors that are beginning to emerge, or have actually emerged, that are working with that definition. We get down to the mayoral level,
Hmm.
and there's a lot more of that going on. Co-creating coordinated movement. That's how things get done. Things don't get done sustainably through directives. They can cause some things to occur, but if you're looking to get a population to really address an issue, and to move into a possibility, not just solve a crisis, but to move from crisis into possibility, you have to have coordinated movement, and you have to have a co-created process where people are buying in. So, when you're thinking about yourself as a leader, I'm speaking here to the listeners on the show right now, pay attention to who you're co-creating with, because with my business, I'm reaching out to people that I've known for a long time, and this conversation is part of that. Co-creating conversations that allows for coordinated movement towards another end, that my business model is changing. Yeah, I mean, it truly is. I've
Hmm.
done a lot, for years, large seminar groups, so, I mean, stage, all of that stuff has gone away right now. It'll come
Right.
back. But the pivot has to do with recognizing that co-creation and coordinated movement is the way that this is going to work. How do I get people to come with? How do I go with others towards a common objective so that we're co-creating an outcome that is
Yeah.
beneficial to both?
Yeah, and I would agree with you that there's quite a few people in kind of visible leadership positions that might not be fitting into that category right now. But also part of what I hear, just for myself personally, is an invitation into leadership. That there's a lot of us, and whether you have any kind of influence over a large group of people or a small group of people or even a very small group of people, like within our families, I think we can look at that definition of leadership and say, how are we doing?
Yeah,
Are we co-creating? Are we coordinating movement?
yeah.
Um,
I mean,
so
the whole question of self isolate, or what do we call this? Self sheltering, or
sheltering in
sheltering in
place,
place,
I guess. Yeah.
and then taking appropriate distancing. I
Right.
mean, my wife has had to work with me on this, so we've co-created some behaviors that I wasn't really bought into initially, and so rather than making me wrong about it, we've had conversation, and it's predicated on
Hmm.
conversations around meaning. And and I think we've gotten to a point where we are co-creating a living climate here, and we're coordinating how we actually go about our day-to-day life. So that's at the micro level. You expand that out and you start getting some very interesting results,
Yeah.
but it's
Well, and
hard
I
to
think,
do.
yeah, yeah, and it's not always easy. I agree, and I think you've answered kind of the second part of my question in answering the first part, in terms of, like, as leaders, those of us who are willing to embrace the role of leaders, like what can we do? And leaning into that definition, being willing to do those things would obviously be part of that. Is there anything that you would add for people who see themselves as leaders or are willing to lean in to that definition of being a leader? What are some of the things that you see that leaders can do to support other people and to move things forward, given everything that's going on?
Great question. I think that's a great question. Everything is about relationship at the end of the day, and I'll just kind of put that as a big contextual box right now. To the degree that relationships are working well, you've got a pretty good shot at being successful in life, and everything is about relationship. Why that's important is relationship functionality and relationship health is predicated on communication, not talking, but actually communicating. And I loved Virginia Satir, the family psychologist. Her definition of communication was, it's the ways, plural, the ways we work out common meaning with one another. So as leaders, we have to be able to communicate in actually different ways than we have before. A lot of organizations right now are working remotely. A remote team working together is fundamentally different because they don't have a lot of the same cues that they would use to work off of. So absent those visual cues, some of those auditory cues, we start to misrepresent things and we start to misinterpret things. So the short answer to this is communicate frequently, communicate consistently, and communicate even when it's hard to do it.
Hmm.
'Cause, I mean, I've been working with a couple of clients right now that are having to lay some folks off, and that's a furloughing process, but it's still a very difficult conversation to have because most of these folks have got some pretty close relationships with these people. Yeah, because most of these are mid-sized companies, and it's not big enterprises with hundreds of thousands of people. So it gets up close and personal. We have to have those conversations, though,
Yep.
and nothing is certain. So one of the counsels I'm giving is don't feel a need as a leader to speak in absolute certainty. You can speak in probabilities. This is what I know right now. What that suggests to me is that we're about 80% likely to go in this direction. If anything changes, I will let you know. And things are changing by the hour in some areas. So, working with probabilities in that context or in that sense will give you some wiggle room. And I mean wiggle room in the sense of it reduces a bit of the stress on you to have an answer as a leader, but it
Hmm.
also gives some certainty to the people that you're speaking to. I mean, when you say it's about 80%, they kind of go, oh, the mind will go, oh, okay, that's something I can hang my hat on. It doesn't have to be 100%. 80% I can work with.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's such a great insight about being willing to have those conversations, and there's a lot of them these days. I have a client that I'm working with, and I was supporting one of their managers yesterday, and she had gotten herself into this place of feeling like if she asked for help, she was admitting weakness. And so she was resisting getting into some of the conversations you're talking about. And I was, this is not a good time. No, don't, don't do that now. No. And it's just another example of one of those conversations you're talking about that are difficult. And there's an element of confrontation and discomfort or whatever. But I agree 100%. Now is not the time to avoid any of those conversations.
Right. And there's actually two sides to that. I mean, I'm doing a lot of work with physicians, you know, and we touched on this stress. I mean, it literally is
Levels
PTSD,
I can't imagine. Yeah.
levels of just incredible stress for these docs, these nurses, healthcare professionals. And the conversation has to go both ways. They need an outlet as well. And so as a leader, you know, to the point of your client, find a sounding board that you can go to and let your hair down and say, you know, I'm scared. I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't want you to fix anything right now. I just need to, you know, to voice my feelings. And if you can have that pressure relief,
Mm-hmm.
it allows you to ground again and come back into the fray.
Yeah, it's so, and that's who I was in this conversation, because I had actually, one of the things I do for this company is I stay in contact on a quarterly basis with some of their managers and supervisors. And I had just finished a round of calls at the beginning of March. And then I went, you know, their world has totally changed. Maybe I should check in. And I did. And I got an immediate response from several of their managers. Just, yes, I need to talk to you for the exact reason that you're talking about. The pressure was just building up and they needed to vent. And I'm one of those sources as an outside person that they know there's been a relationship of trust built there. They know they can vent to me and it's not going to land on someone in HR's desk or their boss or whatever. They just need to get it out of their system. So,
yeah, that's important. That's huge. It's huge.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, and again, you know, we did the quick skim over your bio, but all the international experience. I think in my own experience, I'm noticing it's real easy to kind of see what's close to home, and I think I find myself having a hard time like grasping like the international impact of all this. Can you guys just kind of share your point of view and what you're seeing, and maybe as best you can a glimpse ahead, like where we're headed on an international basis?
Yeah. Boy, where do I even begin with that? Yeah, you mentioned we had 4 affiliate offices. We've got an office in Hong Kong, you know, one in Tokyo, one in Frankfurt, and one in Helsinki, as well as our operations here in the States. Yeah, China just, you know, went completely dark. And a large part, you know, again, my business model and our business model has been, you know, public seminars, group meetings with teams of people in organizations, that sort of stuff. So all of that stuff has gone by the wayside. And it's kind of cascading. It started obviously in China. Japan right now is beginning to notice some increase, particularly in Tokyo. So the social distancing, I mean, you know, I don't need to go into the whole, you know, description of what's happening in that regard, but from a fundamentals perspective, things will get back to some semblance of what we will eventually call normal again. Businesses will emerge from this. They'll be different in some way, shape, or form. How long that's going to take, I'm not sure. The disruption can be, you know, not unlike a physical disaster. It can take some time to replace the levees, you know, that burst in the hurricane. I mean, that sort of stuff. But people are resilient. I'm noticing my partners in both Japan and China right now. You know, they're pivoting. They're looking for ways to actually contribute, and this is, I think, is going to be key. You know, what can I contribute? What can I? You know, I mean, you're talking about you reached out to your client base saying, yeah, times are kind of screwy right now. I'm here. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I'm doing as well, you know, with my clients as well as my partners, is I'm here. And I think what's going to begin to right the ship quickly is we start to redefine the value proposition for business. And I mean something very specific with that. If what I'm doing isn't in some way, shape, or form going to uplift the experience of being alive on this planet, I probably don't deserve to be in business any longer.
Mm-hmm.
So, does my service or product find a way to uplift the experience of the consumer in a way that is tangible? That's where the value in what it is that I'm offering is going to actually begin to be able to be monetized. And I don't want to put it in stark terms in that way, but that's what business will be predicated on if we're
Yeah.
smart. That value proposition. The purpose of business is to uplift the quality of life on the planet. The purpose of business isn't to make a profit. Now, we need to make a profit to stay in business, but the purpose of business is to uplift the experience of living on this planet, uplift the quality of it. And if your product or service is doing that, you're probably going to find long term. So there is a rebuilding. The great ray of hope for me right now, we do a lot of work in Africa, and it has been just completely clamped down, right? Very obvious reasons. Their healthcare systems are not in any way, shape, or form built to handle this kind of calamity.
Mm-hmm.
And that being said, there is a lot of opportunity there for businesses that emerge out of this to uplift the experience of being alive on this planet. And some of the work we do around that economic model has taken root. So I'm very anticipatory, I think, of what can happen in Africa, particularly in some of the communities we've worked with, around that meme. So Europe is going to recover. I mean, we're all going to recover. Again, I go back to 135 AD. We're 18 million people aren't going to die in this pandemic. There will be people that die. There's no question. People are dying.
Mm-hmm.
But we will get through this. Yeah, we will get through this, and we will come out on the other side, hopefully stronger and more intelligent than we were going into it.
So I was going to finish by asking you a question that I've been unwilling to answer lately. People keep asking me, and I was thinking, well, maybe I could just ask Blaine and then I could use his answer, but that doesn't feel fair. So the question I was going to ask you, and you have shared some, I think, some really great insights in this area about kind of where are we headed? Like I feel very confident that in 2 to 3 months, we're going to look around and see things that are very different. Like the world as we know it, the business as we know it is going to be very different. But what I don't know is how, like in what way. And the question I was going to ask you was like, tell me how, but I'm not going to ask you that question because that's not fair. And again, I haven't been willing to answer that question, so it's not fair to ask you to. But what I would like to ask you is like, what are you doing and what would you suggest people do to deal with that kind of unknown? Like the awareness that things are going to be different, that things are changing, but the unknown, like we just don't know yet what that's going to look like. Like, how are you dealing with that, and what would be your suggestions to people to deal with that kind of unknown?
First thing I've done is turn the news off. I mean, truly, what goes into the subconscious mind actually gets manifested in the external world. And so I want to be a curator of what I'm putting into my mind. I really do. So I'm entertaining possibilities. And again, I go back to what I said right at the very beginning here. Every upside has a downside. Every inside has an outside. Every good has a bad. I want to be fixated, and I mean fixated, truly, from an emotional perspective on what's possible. And I will answer the question that you pose about how in this way. When a caterpillar goes into the cocoon, forms a chrysalis, the imago cells, I mean, basically that caterpillar dissolves. I mean, if you open one up, you would just have a gooey, liquid mess in there. It hasn't reconstituted itself. So continuously looking at, inside there to say, how's that happen? The butterfly will never emerge. So the question how can be a very seductive trap. If I keep myself focused on the possibility that I want to have created or manifested in my life, with my business, for my family, keep my focus on that. The how eventually emerges. Yeah, it actually begins to take care of itself. Almost always the how is answered in a typical fashion by a reflection on what I did before. And what I did before may not in any way, shape, or form be useful for where I want to end up going tomorrow.
Mm.
So that's, yeah, it's hard to do that. It really is,
Yeah,
because
there's such a, there's
I
such a
sit here and wrestle with, how am I going to do this?
yeah,
Just let it emerge. Sit
yeah.
back
It's
and
like
still.
there's a constant and high volume invitation into that conversation now, into a lot of conversations. You know, the conversation about panic and fear and
Yeah.
worry and needing to know how and needing to know what's going to be different.
You know, how I describe something determines how I feel about it. How I feel about it generates my behavior. I want to take care of my description process. How am I describing my reality? That influences my emotions. And when I start noticing fear, when I start noticing anxiety and panic, I have to be able to think bigger than my emotions. Otherwise, I'm thinking in concert with my emotions, and that won't work.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Well, again, it's a good thing I set a timer because we could go on and on and on and on here. But I deeply appreciate your willingness to join us. If people do want to connect with you or learn more about your work, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, great. Thank you for that. BlaineBartlett.com. I've got resources up there. You had mentioned 4 books. I've actually got a 5th book that is launching April 1st. It's called The
Perfect
Leadership
timing.
Mindset. Perfect timing, yeah. The Leadership Mindset Weekly. Actually, it's a 52-week long course of study, weekly practices to begin to shift the mindset of leaders and
Mm.
leadership. And
So it really,
it's
I was kind of joking in terms of the book launch in general, but now that you're describing the topic, it is perfect timing. Going back to the conversation about the invitation for a lot of people who might not typically think of them as themselves as leaders, but are opening up to being willing to embrace that role. This sounds like it would be an amazing resource for them.
It is. I mean, the very first lesson is around consciousness. Max Planck said you can get behind everything, you can't get behind consciousness. Consciousness is the first cause of everything.
Yeah.
So that's the first chapter in that book.
Good, good. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for being willing to do this, for being willing to share your wisdom as part of the Wisdom series. And for people who are listening in, thank you so much. Without you, obviously, there's no podcast. So we appreciate you joining us, and hopefully this Wisdom series and the Excellent Decisions podcast in general is helpful to you. Again, helping you make more excellent decisions, more decisions based on vision and values and value rather than stress and pressure, and with the intention of being able to accomplish more and also be truly happy. And you know that the definition of happiness we use here, the ancient Greek definition of happiness, the experience of joy while in pursuit of your potential. And what a time to be pursuing our potential. So thank you again, Blaine. And we'll see you all again on the next episode of the Excellent Decisions podcast.